Today, the Bible definition of sin, or what the Bible calls the old man. The Hebrew and Greek words translated transgression mean moral, religious, and national rebellion, revolt, unrighteousness, wickedness, violation of the law, breaking of the law, and so on. Sin is twofold according to the Bible. Now then, I'm going to give you a Bible definition of what sin is, not human theories. The Bible definition of outward sin. It is called transgression of the law. 1 John 3:4. Sin is transgression of the law. Then we have a statement in Romans 4:15, where no law is, there is no transgression. Romans 3:20 and 7:7, by the law is the knowledge of sin. Then Romans 5:13, sin is not imputed where there is no law or when there is no law. And without the law, sin was dead or dormant, is a statement in the 7th of Romans, verse 8. And again, Proverbs 24:9 says, the thought of foolishness is sin. 2 Corinthians 10:4-5 tells us that God hath given us the weapons of our warfare, which are not carnal, even to the bringing down of every thought to the obedience of Christ. Every idle word that men speak in the day of judgment is considered sinful. Matthew 12:36-37. For he said, men shall give an account of every idle word. And therefore it would have to be sinful, or men would not have to give an account of it. All unrighteousness is sin, we're told in 1 John 5:7, and whatsoever is not of faith is sin. Romans 14:23. If ye have respect to persons, ye commit sin. James 2:9. He that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. Quite a fine point on the subject, isn't it? James 4:17. All actions contrary to the law are sin. Rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. Samuel told Saul in 1 Samuel 15:23, any omission of the law is sin. All the desires and lusts contrary to the law, inwardly or outwardly manifested, are sin. For Jesus said, from within out of the heart of man comes the issues of life. And James 1:13-15 says, as any man tempted, he is drawn away of his own lust, and enticed, and when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. When sin is finished, it bringeth forth death. So we might say that all desires and lusts which lead to outward transgression of the law, outwardly manifested, then they become sinful. These passages that we've stated to you describe outward acts of something far more sinister and powerful than appears on the surface. And that we want to define for you now as what some men call inbred sin, or sin principle, or the remains of sin, or the old man, or whatever you want to call it. It amounts to the same thing. The prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience, is what Paul classes as sin, as far as an inward act is concerned, or as far as the principle or spirit of sin is concerned. The prince of the power of the air, he referred to Satan, the spirit that now worketh in children of disobedience. And in 1 John 3:8 he said, he that committeth sin is of the devil. John 8:41-44, which tells you that ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. So you can see that from these statements, the old man, or inbred sin, is defined as the very devil himself working in men of disobedience, in contrast to the new man, which is the spirit and nature of God working in sons of obedience. Other terms used in Scripture for the old man as the devil working in men are sin, the body of sin, darkness, the body of this death, the old man, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, all ungodliness and unrighteousness, the world, vile affections, the lusts of the mind, a reprobate mind, the lusts of sin, motions of sin, the law of sin and death, the carnal mind, the works of the flesh, the carnal man, the power of Satan, the god of this world, all these and other terms refer to sin that dwelleth in man. These statements of Scripture plainly state that the fact that sin is something more than mere transgression of the law or outward sin, and as being something separate from man himself. Every one of these expressions prove that there is a real law of sin and death, and back of this law, executing it, a real power from a real nature and a real person who is stronger than man himself. It is the old man, the body of sin, that must be destroyed. That's the thing that works in children of disobedience, which is sometimes stronger than man himself. When this old man is delivered or annulled from operating in man, the body, soul, and spirit of man as originally created are still there. Man is liberated from the devil for the first time in his life when this is done. It is the lusts, the desires, the motions of sin from the devil in man's body, soul, and spirit that are destroyed, that are put to death and put off, and not any part of man's created being or part of man's soul and spirit. These lusts are plainly stated as being of the devil and of the world system, which will finally pass away, but man will continue. Men call this aspect of sin inherent sin, sin principle, infection of nature, or some moral disease, a contagious corruption, incentive to sin, depraved nature, sinful propensities, evil tendencies, manifold infirmity. They even call it the carnal nature, the flesh, the carnal mind, the presence and pollution of sin in the heart, the remains of sin, and many other things. These are simply theological terms and express the same thought of Scriptures on this point, that sin is something real in man, separate from man's body, soul, and spirit as originally created of God. Sin is not man's body, soul, or spirit, and that we must get very clearly. Such statements as taketh away the sin of the world, servant of sin, under sin, by one man sin entered, sin abounded, sin hath reigned, not serve sin, let not sin therefore reign in your mortal bodies, servants of sin, free from sin, wages of sin, sin revived, and sin dwelleth in me, and all like terms. All these go to prove that sin is something more than mere outward transgression of a law. All these statements imply that sin is a slave master, a tyrant over man, making him die by forcing him to transgress the law. Sin is a real person apart from man, or it could not reign or dominate or enslave him or slay him or deceive him in any sense. It is a law. That's plainly stated in Scripture. There must be someone who made the law and who enforces it. There could be no law unless it was made by somebody. It would be of no value unless it could be enforced according to the purpose for which it was made. The devil made and enforces the law of sin and death by demons and spirit forces, and it can only be annulled in free moral agents by a greater law enforced by a greater power. Free will seeks the annulment of the law of sin and death by applying to the court of heaven according to the normal law. Both laws conflict as argued by Paul in Romans 7:7-25, thus proving that there are real persons and powers back of each law. This proves that sin is a real spirit and a real nature in man, separate from man's own creative body, soul, and spirit. When man is freed from sin, as stated in Romans 6 and Romans 8, that means that he is liberated from the very spirit and nature of the devil working in the body, soul, and spirit. Such expressions as the body of sin and the body of this death are no doubt an allusion to the horrible mode of punishment mentioned by ancient writers, by which the criminal condemned to death was fastened by chains to the body of the one he murdered and left to die by degrees in the loathsome companionship of the putrefying corpse. Now then, the Bible speaks of men as being under sin. Under, that means controlled by sin, or in an inferior position, or having a lesser power than sin. We have such a statement also as by the law is the knowledge of sin, proving that the sin in man is something that was not originally created in man. Sin is also spoken of as the mortal body, or the flesh, and as the believer is being dead to sin and freed from sin. And we read even of Christ dying unto sin once to take away sin and to put away sin. But he didn't die to put away man's body, soul, and spirit. So the thing we want to emphasize to you is that sin is something more than mere transgression of the law. It is really the spirit and nature of the devil working in children of disobedience. In Romans 7, Paul teaches that sin is a real slave master, and that men can be servants to sin as long as he wants that, as they want to. And he pictures how that men when they get right with God, that they change masters, and they became servants of a new master. And he argues in that chapter that acts of obedience indicate the master served, and change in acts of obedience indicates the master served. And the master served indicates the nature of obedience. And, of course, the nature of obedience indicates the wages received. What fruit had you then in those things whereof ye are now ashamed? For the end of those things is death. But now, being made free from sin, became servants of God, ye have your fruit unto holiness, and the end everlasting life.